Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolina's voting districts have been the subject of debate for years, fought over in the State House and even the country's highest court. We've discussed that in previous episodes. Now lawmakers and lawyers are preparing for another round. Days ago, Republican state lawmakers proposed new voting districts. They would give North Carolina Republicans more representation in Congress. And again, they drew criticism and threats of legal action from the left. But this time, their fight might be less fruitful. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been following the saga, and he joins us now. Will, good to see you again.
Yep, good to see you too.
Will, North Carolina currently has 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives. What would these new maps do?
So these new maps would take it from that 7-7 split in our 14 seats to almost assuredly an 11-3 split favoring the Republican Party. And it would do that by targeting some Democrats in the Triad area around Greensboro, as well as the Raleigh and Charlotte suburbs, and basically carving up those areas and kind of splitting them off into more rural districts, taking a few voters from Greensboro and, sending it down through the central part of the state towards right outside of Fayetteville to, kind of turn that area into a more Republican-leaning district, essentially.
Now, this is no surprise because the party in power at the state legislature is in charge of drawing the maps. That party is the Republican Party. So under these new maps, who would be the winners and losers? Obviously, if you got 7 Democrats and suddenly goes to 11 Republicans, there's got to be some odd men and women out. Who are they?
Wiley Nickel, who represents kind of southwestern Wake County and Johnston County, he is likely looking like he's out. He's a Democrat who won. It's actually a really competitive seat, but he ended up winning that in 2022. He'd be out. Kathy Manning, Democrat who represents Greensboro, she'd be out. And then Jeff Jackson, a Charlotte Democrat, he would be out. And there's 2 different proposed maps, but all of the maps target the 3 of them. The other question, okay, where do they find that 4th Democrat, is going to, depending on which version of the map they go with, is probably going to be either Valerie Foushee, who's an Orange County Democrat, or Don Davis, a Democrat who represents kind of the whole northeastern part of the state. And that is where there could be some legal issues because both Foushee and Davis are black. They are 2 of the 3 black members of our delegation, and there's plenty of litigation on how much voting representation should black residents have here in North Carolina.
Now, who are the possible winners? Who could go into those seats that are vacated by Democrats?
Well, the national GOP is a huge winner in this, and millions of dollars have been spent on these redistricting fights. And as people watch Congress right now with the fights over the Speaker of the House and everything, and Republicans having such a narrow majority in the House, this will be a swing of net 8 seats for the Republicans. They'll gain 4 more seats, and there'll be 4 fewer Democrats. So, this could really help shore up, GOP control of the House heading into the 2024 elections.
And are there any specific Republicans who are eyeing these seats?
Well, we'll have to see. We've heard from in Southwest Wake County, Republican State Representative Aaron Paré plans to run for one of the new districts. There's been a lot of chatter about House Speaker Tim Moore, and both of the maps do happen to have a empty district in his neck of the woods, just west of Charlotte, with no incumbent. So it looks like he'll probably be running, although he hasn't said that officially yet. Especially in the kind of central part of the state, there's a lot of new seats opening up for Republicans who live in the sort of Greensboro area.
Now, on the face of it, a 7-7 split in Congress seems to make sense. Voter affiliation in the state is almost evenly split between Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters. How did Republican lawmakers come up with 11-3?
Well, the short answer is because they could. There was a famous quote a few redistricting cycles ago where one of the map makers said, we drew this map to give Republicans 10 seats because we couldn't figure out a way to give us 11 seats. And that's kind of the same MO that we're seeing here. I should say Republicans say that the 7-7 split doesn't make sense, even though in statewide elections, it's, the presidential races here are always, someone wins with 49% of the vote. But they say that's because, Democrats really concentrate in urban areas, whereas Republicans are far more spread out evenly across the state. So that kind of gives them a natural built-in advantage. from past evidence in trials over this that I've covered over the years, it seems that probably the most fair split, taking into account that political geography of the state, would probably be maybe an 8-6 or 9-5 split in favor of Republicans.
Now, surprise, surprise, Democrats say these new maps are unfair. What are their arguments?
Well, one is the fairness factor, that they say, look, the statewide vote is so evenly split and these maps will be so lopsided for Republicans. And we should note, not just in the congressional races, but also there's new state legislative maps as well that would be similarly lopsided. And so they point to, just kind of that top line result. But then they also say, you look more closely at it, and especially in the congressional maps, it really carves up the urban areas and splits off more parts of the places like Raleigh and Charlotte and Greensboro and Fayetteville than legally needs to happen. Wake County has to be split twice. Mecklenburg County has to be split twice, but these maps split them 3 times. And then you have smaller urban counties, places like Fayetteville's Cumberland County, that don't necessarily need to be split, but do get split. Same with Rocky Mount. That gets split up in some of these maps. And so they point to those as examples of, specific decisions that Republicans made to carve up Democratic voters, kind of spread them out and dilute their political power.
And Republicans say what?
They say that they're allowed to do it, that the state constitution says the legislature has full control of redistricting. Even a few decades ago, when we created the veto here in North Carolina, we specifically said the governor can't veto redistricting maps because the feeling was that the legislature should have complete control over the process. And so they say, hey, we're in charge. Elections have consequences. We get to decide what these maps look like.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear more about why legal challenges to proposed North Carolina voting districts might face less judicial sympathy. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about controversial North Carolina voting districts proposed by state lawmakers. Will, we've heard all of this before, as we've mentioned. One party draws the maps, the other party cries foul. Give us a brief history of how we got to where we are today.
So for decades, North Carolina has actually kind of been one of the most important states for gerrymandering. Going back even to the 80s, we've kind of been setting the national rules because there's been so many lawsuits here for what you can or can't do when you're drawing the maps. Democrats, got in trouble for racial gerrymandering when they were in charge of the legislature. Republicans took over in 2011. They immediately lost a lawsuit over racial gerrymandering as well. Then they redrew the maps, got sued the next time, not over racial gerrymandering, but over partisan gerrymandering. And that led to the U.S. Supreme Court saying, we don't really want to get into this, but we're going to let state courts figure out what the deal with partisan gerrymandering is. And then so last year, that's exactly what happened. We redrew the maps again in 2021 after the new census. The state Supreme Court looked at those and said, these are unconstitutional. These are extreme partisan gerrymanders that violate the state constitution's guarantee of free elections. Essentially, they said elections can't be free if the results don't match what voters want. That, however, was under a Democratic majority on the court. Republicans then flipped control of the court in the 2022 elections, and pretty much the first thing that new GOP majority did was come in and undo that decision, say that was wrong, that was essentially judicial activism, and that the legislature should be given free rein to do essentially whatever they want with these new maps.
So with this new state Supreme Court with a Republican majority, how will Democrats and voter rights groups fight these maps, as they've indicated that they might?
Well, they should sue in federal court if they want to win. We obviously can't predict the future, but the GOP majority was very clear in their ruling earlier this year that they don't see any role for state courts on partisan gerrymandering claims. So, people may try suing in state court, but not necessarily guaranteed to go well. Federal court, however, still, even if federal court doesn't recognize partisan gerrymandering claims, it does recognize racial gerrymandering claims. And that's why what I mentioned earlier with especially the congressional maps and how it treats, the districts held by Don Davis and Valerie Foushee, that could be the subject of Federal Voting Rights Act lawsuits. And we actually heard that already from Democrats in the last few days. They have pointed to decisions like that and suggested that the maps do indeed violate the Voting Rights Act.
Now, Republicans have been fairly quiet about all this, from drawing these maps, even to commenting on them in committee. Why is that?
Their lawyers are telling them to, and they have been public about that. I was covering one committee hearing recently where Democratic State Senator Natasha Marcus from Charlotte was, trying to grill some of the GOP map makers over certain decisions they made, over, what records they created and are going to keep, potentially to be called up for evidence at trial. And Senator Warren Daniel, who's one of the top GOP map makers, said, "I'm not going to talk about that on advice of counsel." They know they're going to get sued, and so their lawyers are telling them, hey, don't say anything that might, cause trouble in a future trial.
Now, Republicans have taken some heat from Democrats over the transparency of this process. Can you explain why?
So there's been a couple reasons. One that was that starting back in before the 2020 elections, we redrew some maps, and that was actually ordered by the court to be done fully in public view. And that was the first time ever. For decades, it had always been done in the proverbial, smoke-filled back room, private deals going down. No one knows, what's being said or how they're kind of playing with the maps as they go along. But due to a lawsuit in 2019, the judges said, we don't think that, we can really trust the legislature to follow even their own rules unless it's being done out in public. So they ordered it to be done publicly. And then in 2021, that court order was no longer in place, but GOP leadership said, hey, we think that went well. We're going to voluntarily do it in public again, just kind of as a show of good faith. Now, they got sued anyways. They lost. And so this time around, they said, you know what? We don't need to do the whole public thing. We're just going to go back to the olden days of writing these in a back room, and just kind of throwing them out there, saying, here's what you got. We're going to vote on them. There's not going to be any public hearings on this. There will be opportunities for legislators to debate them, but, there's not going to be too many changes made. And then another critique that some transparency advocates have is actually relates to the state budget, which exempted the legislature from a lot of public records laws, some just kind of broad public records laws, but also specifically relating to redistricting. And essentially that could allow for lawmakers to not submit some of their records, in potential lawsuits that are coming up. People who sue are going to try to get, previous versions of maps and communications that lawmakers have had with GOP consultants, things like that. And it seems that the new law may allow them to just destroy all those records.
So what happens next?
Well, like we said, they're going to pass these maps. They're going to get sued. The question really is just how quickly all of that happens, and then it'll be up for the courts to decide. And obviously the most immediate question, once these maps become law, they're going to be used for the 2024, 2026, 2028, and 2030 elections. We're not going to redistrict again until 2031, unless, of course, they get ruled unconstitutional. So immediately the question is, okay, 2024 is fast approaching. Is a court going to stop these from being used in those elections, or will the elections be able to be held under these maps even while a lawsuit is still proceeding?
Well, as always, I know that you'll be on top of it. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. For his latest coverage of the redistricting battle, visit nccapital.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.